I'm writing this because my entire world turned upside down last week, and I still can't wrap my head around everything that happened. For years, I'd resented my older brother for a betrayal that cut so deep it shattered our relationship beyond repair. I'd made it perfectly clear to my parents that I didn't want him anywhere near my wedding. So, imagine my shock when I spotted him lurking at the back of the reception hall. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but there he was, the one person I never wanted to see again. I knew all too well. I'm certain my parents invited him, hoping we'd magically reconcile, but they did it behind my back. They must have figured that if he just showed up, I'd be forced to tolerate his presence for one day. As soon as I realized he was there, I felt my stomach churn with anger and a sense of betrayal. My husband noticed I was shaking, and I had to steady myself to keep from walking out of my own wedding. But there's no way I was going to let my brother ruin my big day, at least not without me getting the last word. I took a moment to collect myself, mentally replaying every hurtful thing my brother had ever done. The most devastating was how he slept with my ex-girlfriend back when we were in college. The heartbreak it caused me then still burned. I'd discovered it purely by accident, seeing some flirty messages on his phone while I'd been borrowing it. When I confronted him, he didn't bother to deny it. The worst part was his indifference. He didn't seem sorry. He shrugged, offering nothing but excuses about how things happen. That was it for me. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wanted to cancel the wedding on the spot. Another part felt numb, like I was watching someone else's nightmare, but I refused to let him see that he could hurt me. I plastered on a smile and went through the motions of cutting cake, greeting relatives, and posing for photos. My parents avoided my gaze, probably worried I'd confront them in front of everyone. But I bided my time, running on pure adrenaline and spite. When the time came for the speeches, my maid of honor delivered a sweet toast about how she'd never seen me so happy. My husband's best man followed up with a couple of jokes that had the crowd laughing. Then, it was my turn. People rarely expect the bride to stand up and say anything beyond a quick thank you, but I wanted my moment, and I was determined to claim it. I scanned the room until I spotted my brother near the back. His wife was sitting beside him, visibly pregnant, and I felt a surge of vindictive triumph as I imagined the bombshell I was about to drop. I started by thanking everyone for coming, making the usual remarks about how much it meant to share our joy. Then I steered the spotlight toward the elephant in the room. I said there was someone here I never intended to invite, someone who'd broken my trust. I saw my brother stiffen, his eyes widening. My parents looked mortified, silently begging me to stop, but I kept going. I explained how that person had once betrayed me in the most personal way possible, sleeping with my girlfriend, who I'd been with for 2 years. The crowd fell silent. I could hear hearts pounding. I could see my brother visibly squirm. I locked eyes with him. The shock on his face was almost worth the years of anger I'd bottled up. I'd never intended to speak publicly about it, but after seeing him stroll into my wedding, I wanted him to feel every ounce of shame he deserved. His wife looked from him to me and back again, clearly piecing things together. It was a surreal moment. My parents looked ready to faint, but I carried on. I said I'd forgiven many things in life, but never that. Not once did he apologize or show genuine remorse, and that told me everything I needed to know about who he truly was. People started murmuring. A few relatives looked at my brother with expressions of bewilderment and disgust. I wrapped up my toast by saying I hoped everyone else enjoyed their evening, but if anyone needed to make a quick exit, I'd understand. The entire room was tense, and the silence hung in the air like a dense fog. Then, one of my aunts, my dad's sister, stood up and muttered something about shameful secrets. She gave my brother a glare, grabbed her coat, and walked out. I suppose I could have ended my speech there, but I wasn't done. I told my parents I'd found out they were responsible for inviting him. I said I was disappointed they disregarded my boundary on the most important day of my life. My voice shook, and I could see them sinking into their seats. Nobody spoke. All you could hear was the scraping of forks and the hushed shuffle of uncomfortable guests. I handed the microphone back to the MC and stepped off the stage, feeling both rage and relief. In that moment, I knew I'd never regret exposing him. Betrayal deserves consequences. I felt triumphant. After the speeches, the reception limped along awkwardly. People tried to dance and chat, but the tension was still thick. My brother's wife appeared shell-shocked, and I heard she'd asked him right then and there if it was true. He apparently tried to brush it off, insisting it happened a long time ago. But a betrayal is a betrayal, no matter when it happened. I kept my distance from him, focusing on enjoying what was left of the night with my husband and close friends. At one point, my mom grabbed my arm in the hallway and whispered that I'd ruined everything. She said I'd made a scene, humiliated our family, and disrespected the sanctity of my own wedding. I asked her why she thought it was okay to invite him without telling me. She tried to justify it, saying he was family and deserved a chance to reconnect. I shook my head, feeling a flare of white-hot anger. If reconnecting was so important, they should have talked to me beforehand, not ambushed me on my wedding day. She seemed at a loss for words. A couple of hours later, when most guests had left, I spotted my brother and his wife near the exit. She looked furious. Her arms were crossed, and she was glaring at him with tears in her eyes. I walked over, and for a split second, I wondered if I should apologize. But that thought vanished as soon as I remembered all the heartbreak he'd caused me. If he wanted an apology from me, he wasn't getting one. He stared at me, looking both panicked and furious himself. I just gave him a cold nod. In that moment, the only satisfaction I felt was that my truth had finally been aired, for better or worse. Days later, rumors swirled that his wife had moved out. My cousin confirmed it. She'd apparently packed a bag and gone to stay with her sister. She was furious not just about his past affair with my ex, but also about how he tried to dodge responsibility when confronted. She'd believed him to be a loyal husband, someone she could trust implicitly. Finding out he'd done something so low made her question their entire relationship. Add hormones from pregnancy to the mix, and the situation exploded. I can't pretend I felt bad for him. I actually felt vindicated, though I tried not to bask in it openly. Friends who knew the backstory sent me messages of support, saying they were proud of me for standing up for myself. A few, however, thought I'd gone too far, claiming I should have handled the matter privately. But how could I, when my brother and parents blindsided me in such a public way? They forced my hand, they wanted a picture-perfect reunion at my wedding, and instead, they got a scandal that's turned into a family-wide fiasco. My parents tried calling me repeatedly. I ignored them for a while, needing space to cool off. Then, I finally answered one of their calls, only to be berated for destroying my brother's marriage. I asked why it was my job to protect the secret of his infidelity, especially when it involved my ex. They claimed I should have shown compassion. I laughed at the irony. Compassion was the last thing on my mind when I saw the man who'd humiliated me. I told them they should direct their outrage at him. He was the one who'd cheated, after all. Then I hung up and blocked them for the time being. I felt zero remorse afterward. In the midst of this chaos, my new husband stayed firmly in my corner. He told me that while it was extreme, he understood why I felt compelled to reveal the truth. I'd been deeply hurt. He reminded me that we deserved to celebrate our marriage without being ambushed. It felt good to have his unwavering support, especially when my parents were making me feel like the bad guy. Our honeymoon was supposed to be the following week, and we debated postponing it, but ultimately decided we needed the getaway more than ever. Before we left, however, I got a message from my brother's wife. I hesitated to open it, worried it would be a torrent of blame or insults, but it wasn't. She said she appreciated me for telling the truth and that she wished she'd known earlier. She admitted that his refusal to own up to his mistakes was the real issue, not just the affair itself. Now she didn't know if she could trust him at all. She was considering filing for divorce, despite being pregnant, because she felt betrayed by the lies and manipulation. I responded that I was sorry she had to find out at my wedding, but I wasn't sorry for exposing him. I told her I'd support her if she needed anything. We boarded a plane for our honeymoon the next morning. Despite the tension, we managed to enjoy ourselves. I tried to put the drama out of my mind, at least temporarily, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a family reckoning was underway. My phone kept buzzing with texts and missed calls, and I turned it off. I decided I was done letting them ruin this special time with my husband. Our new life deserved a peaceful start. We needed peace. 2 weeks later, we came back to a storm of messages. My parents had left voicemails, some tearful, others angry. My father insisted I'd torn the family apart. My mother wanted me to meet for coffee and talk this through. I wasn't interested. I didn't trust them after what they'd done. I had no obligation to keep secrets that weren't mine. If anything, they should have respected my decision not to include my brother. They'd forced this confrontation. I also learned that my brother's wife had officially filed for divorce. My cousin told me she'd heard it from a reliable source. The wife was staying at her sister's place and planned to move to another city to be closer to extended family. She felt she needed a fresh start, especially with a baby on the way. My brother was reportedly losing his mind, trying everything from apologies to bribes to get her back. But when trust is shattered, especially in such a humiliating way, it's not easy to mend. Privately, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was the exact outcome I'd predicted when he first betrayed me. Eventually, karma catches up. He'd once nonchalantly told me, "Things happen," as if that justified his actions. Now, something was happening to him, and it was entirely his own fault. I wouldn't forgive or forget. That single act of betrayal years ago had rippled through our lives, culminating in this catastrophic meltdown at my wedding. To me, it was poetic justice. Maybe some people will say I'm cold-hearted, but they didn't spend years carrying that hurt, nor did they watch their parents blatantly ignore their wishes on the biggest day of their life. I felt no sympathy for him. Actions have consequences, and his were finally upon him. He deserved it. A few more weeks passed, and I remained no contact with my brother. My parents kept trying to guilt me into forgiving him, or at least talking to him. They argued that life was too short for grudges, and that we were family. But they'd crossed a line that day, so I stood my ground. My husband agreed wholeheartedly, reiterating that none of this would have happened if they'd respected my decision. Meanwhile, my brother's life was a wreck. Friends told me he was barely functional at work. He'd moved back into my parents' house temporarily after his wife had gone through with the separation. She was planning to finalize the divorce as soon as possible. The baby was due in a few months, and she didn't want him there. People can judge her for that, but I get it. Trust is crucial in a marriage, and he'd blown it in the worst way. Why would she want someone who's capable of such a betrayal beside her in the delivery room? I heard through the grapevine that he tried to blame me for ruining everything, calling me vindictive and petty. But the truth was, I'd kept quiet for years. I only spoke out when he turned up uninvited to my wedding. It still baffles me that he thought I'd just smile and pretend the past never happened. My parents said I should have taken the high road. Maybe they were right in a perfect world. But in reality, people snap when they're cornered. That's exactly what happened. I snapped. And while I can't say I'm proud of the spectacle, I'm not ashamed either. He earned that humiliation by refusing to own his actions or show genuine remorse. Actions speak louder than empty apologies ever could. I stand by my choice entirely. Months passed, and the baby arrived. Through social media updates, I discovered my brother wasn't even present at the birth. His ex-wife made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. She was focusing on her newborn and said she'd have to think long and hard before deciding if he'd ever have a role in the child's life. My parents tried to intervene, begging her to let my brother see the baby. She refused to budge, citing trust issues that ran too deep. I found out they'd tried to blame me again, telling her that I'd set out to destroy her marriage, but she wasn't buying it. She told them she'd made her own decision after witnessing his complete inability to own up to his mistakes. She was tired of his excuses, and my revelation only forced him to confront the truth he'd been bearing for years. Apparently, she'd asked him multiple times if there were other affairs, and he got defensive, which only fueled her suspicions that he might have cheated more than once. Whether that's true, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. As for my parents, they kept alternating between scolding me and begging me to help fix the mess. I refused. I told them it was their own doing. They'd orchestrated his appearance at my wedding, fully aware of my feelings. I owed them nothing. My husband wholeheartedly agreed, urging me to maintain my boundaries for the sake of my mental health. Watching them scramble was oddly validating. Maybe they'd finally learn that manipulating situations for a fantasy family reunion never works. It seemed like they were grasping at straws, desperate to salvage an image of unity that no longer existed, and maybe never truly had in the first place. Their desperation didn't move me. I wish I could say there was some miraculous resolution where everyone learned their lesson and we all hugged it out. That never happened. My brother remains estranged, living under my parents' roof, grappling with a divorce he never wanted. His ex is raising their baby on her own terms, and from what I hear, she's much happier without him. My parents still hope for reconciliation, but I've made it clear I'm not interested in rebuilding bridges that were burned long ago. People on the outside might think I'm cruel for not forgiving him, but they don't understand the depth of that betrayal. When someone sleeps with your partner and shrugs it off, it's more than a mistake. It's a complete disregard for your feelings. My brother never apologized, never tried to repair the damage. He expected me to move on as if nothing ever happened. My parents helped enable that mindset by sweeping it under the rug. Perhaps they believed time would heal all wounds, but time just hardened my resolve. Some days I do feel a pang of sadness, mourning the sibling bond I wish I'd had, but that's not the life I was dealt. Instead, I channeled my pain into something definitive, the truth. And in doing so, I unleashed a chain of events that forced everyone to confront the lies they'd been hiding behind. My wedding toast was the catalyst, and I have no regrets. If I'd stayed silent, my resentment would have festered forever. Now, I focus on my new marriage and the life we're building. My husband and I have our own family to nurture. I won't waste energy on people who betrayed me, nor will I keep their secrets. The damage is done, and the lesson is clear. Betrayals never stay buried for long.